Part 5. Method. A magic performance consists of a collection of tiny lies in words and deeds that are stacked and arranged ingeniously to form the battlement for an illusion. Jim Steinmeier. Part of completely understanding what something is begins with defining what something is not. Jamy Ian Swiss begins our method conversation with a warning. The method is not the trick. The method should be considered when choosing material, but it cannot be the only consideration, and it should not be prioritized above the effect. The Method is Not the Trick by Jamy Ian Swiss. The egg bag and the linking rings are classic tricks that combine a mechanical method with sleight of hand, and invariably the best performances are those in which the sleight of hand is superior and the psychological requirements are well understood. Inferior versions quickly reveal their weaknesses when the performer fails to master the sleight of hand, and perhaps the psychology as well, and relies too heavily on the mechanical method. This is a common failing that can be found in all branches of magic, from conjuring to illusions to mentalism. Whenever a practitioner makes the deadly mistake of thinking that the method is the trick. In fact, the method is part of the foundation, albeit a significant part, on which a mystery must be carefully constructed. But mystery is a delicate thing, and most methods, in and of themselves, are far too coarse to rely on in creating such a demanding and fragile composition as a thoroughly magical experience. Jamy Ian Swiss, Gaffes versus Skill, Antimony Number 1. When we begin in magic, we are fascinated by method. Although possessed of a budding desire to share the experience of magic with others, at first, we do magic primarily for ourselves, to satisfy our desire for power and control, and to fulfill our appetite for secret knowledge. Eventually, if we are fortunate, we learn to serve the audience's needs as a way to serve our own, transcending our self-absorption and transforming the use of magic as a bludgeon into the use of magic as a gift of experience. But that will come later, if at all. First, there is the method. Titillated by the ability to surmount the barriers of secrecy, thrilled by first glimpses of the inner workings of conjuring, we hunger for more and more methods, and rarely are we satiated for long. The video age has better enabled method gluttony than any other, and our numbers are bloated by the methodologically obese, filled to bursting with the useless fat of couch potato feasting, with little performance muscle developed by the slimming and toning regiment of practice and mastery. To be sure, the study of method is a necessity, but it is an appetite that, like most, must be balanced with other fare, and tempered with actual technical skills. Knowledge and mastery of method are two vastly different things, and knowing a method makes you a magician as much as reading a medical book makes you a surgeon. Knowledge of theory, the study of performance elements, including stagecraft, presentation skills, script writing, and the like, are all further requirements of the conjuring art. But even these important elements combined will fail if certain critical needs are not met, namely, misdirection and the psychology of magic. Without this total menu, one can never grow to become the complete conjurer. Why? Because the method is not the trick. If you think this deceptively simple point is obvious, ask yourself this: why, time and time again, are we faced with magicians who operate as if the method is indeed the trick? Let's begin by considering the typical illusion act, in which loud music is played, a box is wheeled out, a woman is put into it. She is apparently perforated, divided, or disassembled in some manner, then quickly restored. The box is wheeled off, another vapid noise is heard over the sound system, and the next box is wheeled out. Doubtless, even in that blunt, if sadly too often accurate account, I have stepped beyond my stated point, and accordingly, I will ignore the lack of personality, point of view, intellect, and artistic content in these acts, in which the illusionist is little more distinctive a personality than his box-jumping accompanists. My primary concern here is method. Typically, what is the method of these box illusions? Far too frequently, off-the-shelf illusion acts repeatedly demonstrate a naive over-reliance on the wedge-base principle, in which a person is concealed in a base built to appear thinner than it actually is, too thin apparently to contain a human being. Understand that the principle itself is not at fault. It is unarguably sound. The problem lies in the performer's blind faith in what is, by itself, a simplistic idea, the nature of which can rapidly become transparent to the observant, especially when repeated, and invariably when lacking accompanying aids to deception. A completely deceptive illusion is a delicate thing, composed of many parts. As Jim Steinmeier writes in Hiding the Elephant, a magic performance consists of a collection of tiny lies, in words and deeds, that are stacked and arranged ingeniously to form the battlement for an illusion. It's a delicate battle of wits, an audience that welcomes being deceived, then dares to be fooled, alternately questioning, prodding, and surrendering. Methods tend to be simple things, and often simply crude. This becomes apparent if the methods are left bare and unassisted by skilled handling, presentation, performance, and above all, by psychological deftness. But the method is not the trick. If you wheel one wedge base out after another, in due course, and perhaps short order, you will be the only one in the theater who remains deceived. These elements of handling and presentation, and even misdirection, are still not the entire story. What, after all, is the too perfect theory, if not an approach to assuring that the actual method is not laid bare to the audience's view and eventual discovery? We cancel methods, as Darrell called the concept, or to use another term, we apply Juan Tamariz's theory of false solutions, because we recognize that the method is not the trick. And if the actual method is all we leave for the audience to examine, some will doggedly follow that path until they reach that method, whereupon the illusion dies in their eyes. In the golden age of illusion invention, and even up to the last performing days of the likes of Dante and Harry Blackstone Sr., illusions were actually performed, not demonstrated, as is so often the case today. The great illusionists were men possessed of conjuring training and skill and expertise, possessed of personalities and points of view, and all these elements were thoroughly displayed and exploited in their performances. Today we know that if you perform small magic on platforms and stages, what used to be called parlor or nightclub magic, the performer must have a personality and a point of view. I do not suggest that all such performers are actually so equipped, but we do know that something that passes for a personality must be present, lest the egg bag be left to its own devices. But somehow, illusionists, and it seems those who regularly book them for magic conventions, appear to operate under the assumption that they do not require these elements. They need only possess the box, a reasonably flexible young girl, and some third-rate pop music, for which they probably haven't paid the rights. Absent these elements of a complete performance, there is nothing left on stage but the method, and that simply isn't enough. The audience is left in a little game of hide and seek. She hides. The audience seeks. And where exactly is she now in that box? But no one thinks she is actually gone, much less penetrated or disassembled. No one is deceived, save the magician once more, for thinking his illusion a success. Many factors have led to this dismal state of the art for large illusions. Portability, the lack of bad angles, and other concerns of practicality make these illusions appealing to the working act. But pragmatism can be the enemy of art, as Tommy Wonder so efficiently proves in his essay, Practical Thinking. Another factor, I suspect, is that, in the past, magicians tended to graduate through the ranks of conjuring, eventually reaching illusion work. Today, a remarkable number of young magicians are jamming their girlfriends into the cramped confines of their first thin sawing before learning the fundamental principles of conjuring. And it would appear some illusion builders are as innocent of such knowledge as those utilizing their wares. Some are not even aware of how to construct a convincing wedge base, much less install the subtle details, visible, concealed, and mechanical, of the long-abused Harbin zigzag girl. Unarguably one of the greatest illusions ever invented, the trick as seen today is a pale shadow of Harbin's original. Harbin invited an audience member up to witness the action as if it were a close-up trick, and he talked to the audience at length in his engaging and entertaining manner. Harbin's approach to performing his invention was a quintessential example of what John Thompson calls talking away the box, which is arguably the single most important requirement of any effective illusion performance. Countless modern illusions, blades, tubes and rods penetrating a lady, are failed attempts to vary Harbin's zigzag by only varying the weapons, i.e., the blades become metal tubes in the shapes of Brobdingnagian cookie cutters. Each variant drifts further and further from the point of origin, until the beauty, the magic, the deceptiveness, the illusion of Harbin's original is as absent from the proceedings as its inventor. This may sound like a clarion call to bring back the old days, but consider the alternatives. How many wedge bases did we see in Lance Burton's show? Among the most prominent illusionists of our time, Lance mixed and matched the time-honored methods of illusion technology, mirrors and traps and other forms of human concealment, canceling methods as would an expert manipulator, and never leaving a defenseless box on stage for the audience to ponder at length. Always there is misdirection and production and personality and variety to steer the spectators off the track, and I don't recall any wedges the last time I saw the show. Illusionists would do well to consider why, and the advantages of being able to build a show into your own theater are not the only reasons. But let us leave the beleaguered illusionist, for he is not our actual target. He is but a convenient example of a ubiquitous problem. Almost anywhere we look in magic, certainly in the magic contest and the magic convention show, we can find unadorned methods, left naked before the cold-blooded, unblinking eyes and minds of the audience. And so we move from macro to micro. What is the method of the French drop? To pretend to transfer a small object from one hand to another while actually retaining it in the original hand? Not really. That is the goal of a correctly executed French drop. But the method involves the fingers beneath the displayed coin, lowering themselves infinitesimally, just sufficiently, to allow the coin to drop back into the hand. An inferior but commonplace alternative, more prone to flashing, is to raise the thumb that supports the top of the coin to allow the coin to drop to the fingers. Sleight of hand conjurers would never claim that this tiny bit of mechanics, which enables the coin to drop out of the way, and the taking hand to feign grasping it, comprises the entire method of the French drop. Effective execution of the sleight depends on many small movements of the body, designed to make the contrived action of the transfer believable. Michael Close has pointed out that the very notion of transferring an object from one hand to another occurs rarely in real life. When we pick out some coins before we insert them into a vending machine or hand them to a cashier is one exception. Therefore, the action is prone to suspicion from the start, and we must use every weapon in our arsenal to render it convincing and deceptive. And so, we must precisely time the transfer, dealing with the difficult challenge of mastering simulation. We must simulate the initial holding hand subsequently pretending to be an empty hand while it conceals the coin. And we must make the taking hand, actually empty, appear to be holding a coin. We should provide further support by simulating additional body language, by shifting the weight of the entire body from the left leg, if the left hand begins by displaying the coin, to the right leg, assuming the right hand is apparently taking the coin. This is accomplished by alternately locking the knee of the weight-bearing leg and slightly bending the knee of the weightless leg. We must also appear to transfer tensions between the hands. As the coin is transferred, the receiving hand becomes tense, communicated by a stiffened wrist, and the relinquishing hand, now supposedly empty, becomes relaxed, communicated by a broken wrist. In addition to this, we must direct the audience's attention when and where we wish. As with almost any false transfer, we would look at the displayed coin first, then glance up at the audience during the false transfer, then look down at the imaginary coin, or intended coin, to use Al Schneider's useful term of intention of reality, apparently being held in the new hand. With these many subtle gestures and more, we provide focus and point with our body and our attention, instead of with the obvious pointing forefinger of the concealing hand. In sum, we transfer everything but the coin, including focus, weight, and tension. Effective, experienced sleight-of-hand magicians invariably build these actions into their sleight-of-hand maneuvers, whether consciously, as part of a deliberate theoretical and technical approach, or unconsciously by design of experience. Without these complex support mechanisms, the tiny mechanical action of dropping the coin to the fingers, the method of the French drop, would never fool anyone. Yet, as the scale of the trick grows, magicians can lose sight of these requirements. The shell, for example, may be the method of the multiplying billiard balls. But when a beginner relies too directly on the use of the shell, it quickly becomes apparent to the audience that something is not right with the props. Somehow, the spectators are aware they are not being permitted to see everything. Somehow, those balls are collapsing into one another in some mechanical fashion. What makes the multiplying billiard balls deceptive is the total complement of sleight-of-hand skills, including vanishes other than those provided directly by the shell, concealed transfers, steals, simulation skills, body language, and misdirection. The half shell is the method, and an ingenious and powerful one at that, but it is not the trick. Consider the zombie gimmick, a piece of stiff wire. As Tommy Wonder has written, The gimmick isn't the secret to the illusion. It is only there to keep the ball from falling. But the illusion is the levitation of the ball, and the gimmick no more makes the ball float than gasoline drives one's car. The illusion of levitation is created purely by psychology, handling, and acting. Tricks built on combining a gaffed principle and sleight of hand can often be the most confusing to magicians, especially to beginners, who become overly dependent on the gaff at the expense of the illusion. Tricks like the egg bag and linking rings, expertly done, are actually sleight of hand tricks that incorporate a gaff. They are not merely gaffed tricks that can be improved by the addition of some sleight of hand at the performer's option. The decline of much small apparatus magic was, I suspect, partly due to magicians' overconfidence in and abuse of mechanical methods. A book like Great Tricks Revisited by Robert Parrish serves to remind us what marvelous effects can be achieved with small apparatus tricks like the nest of boxes, the die box, the clock dial, and others, when a talented and creative conjurer with an eye for detail applies all the support elements necessary for creating a deceptive illusion. And in Mr. Parrish's case, at least, engaging and entertaining ones as well. The demise of so much small apparatus magic, and the relegating of such tricks to the children's birthday party circuit, was doubtless due to cultural reasons, and to the audience's increasing intolerance for contrived apparatus, much of it devised in the Victorian and Edwardian eras. Nevertheless, I cannot help but suspect that poor execution by amateur conjurers, who depended entirely on a simple gimmick, rather than constructing a complete and careful illusion, also helped seal the fate of such devices. And while we are theorizing, I will suggest that sophisticated conjurers do not condescend toward kid show magicians because they perform for kids. They condescend because too often, though by no means always, such performers know little about conjuring and tend to rely entirely and crudely on gaffed apparatus. Of course, the same disdain is held for those working hacks who perform for adults by relying on self-working tricks and trite gags, all of which can pay the rent but offer no artistic dividends. Speaking of this breed, let us consider the species' favorite trick, the invisible deck. By this title I do not refer simply to the method of the ultramental deck, but rather to the classic Eddie Field's presentation, popularized and marketed by Don Allen. Use of the invisible deck presentation does not, in and of itself, make one a hack, although it probably puts you in the running. There are those rare performers who have added something of themselves to the premise. Bill Malone comes to mind. But have you ever noticed, as my friend Eric Mead pointed out to me, that when a hack performer includes the invisible deck in his act, it is invariably his best trick? Why is that? His having few, if any, other ideas might admittedly contribute, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is that, unlike most tricks, the invisible deck comes complete. The invisible deck has it all: presentation, misdirection, the elements that create illusion. Not only does it begin with a superbly deceptive method, but the hack will find it all but impossible to present the method as the trick. Rather, the routine comes complete with its own misdirection, psychology, and presentation. By the time you take the audience through all the rigmarole of handling the imaginary pack, you are building strong misdirective barriers to the notion that the deception relies simply and entirely on a gaffed deck of cards. You are entertaining the audience with the process of the trick, rather than merely slogging through for an eventual payoff. Of course, nothing is foolproof, because fools can be very determined. There are those who will have a spectator name a card and then promptly show it reversed in the pack. But one needn't be a working hack or an outright tyro to mistake a method for a trick. Increasingly, I see instances in which an experienced magician changes or expands into a new field. A manipulator goes mentalist. A close-up performer turns illusionist. In such cases, those whose work possesses a strong theoretical underpinning will generally fare better, as these are the practitioners with an abstract insight into the real ingredients of their craft. But many performers, even some of the best, reach their accomplishments more intuitively, and when the time for a radical change of material comes, this lack of theory can fail them badly. For example, a performer who understands the requirements for an entertaining bit of talking conjuring, when he elects to attempt a silent illusion, may overlook the demanding challenges he faces when handling a heavy and complex mechanical device as if it were a simple board or an unbroken hoop. Instead of creating the illusion of it being light, he looks like he is assembling a piece of industrial machinery, because, in fact, he is. Illusions are difficult to perform well, which is why they rarely are. It is intimidating to stand there, sweating in your costume, balancing your assistant, who is bound into a steel and leather harness, trying to insert a pin into a hole that will result in a pressure point of thousands of pounds per square inch, and somehow create the illusion of delicacy, much less weightlessness. Consider the difference between Robert Houdin's original suspension, apparently a precarious experiment in balance, enhanced by the supposed effects of ether, and the typical broomstick suspension, an apparent exposition on the principle of the lever. Truly, the method is not the trick. Or imagine our silent manipulator turned mentalist, armed with a book test and a list of memorized words. The spectator need only open the book and think of a word, and mind reading ensues. Or does it? What if the spectator chooses the wrong word? Shall we blame the helper? Or consider the possibility that mentalism, as with any conjuring feat requiring audience instruction, depends on precise and effective language and highly developed skills in audience management. The challenge with all mentalism is that of procedure. To create the illusion of mind reading, the performance should appear procedureless. Of course, this is not literally possible, for to obtain or control the flow of information secretly, procedure is necessary. The requirement is, to invoke John Thompson's illusion dictum, that we must talk away the procedure. But far too often, mentalism sinks into a bog of procedure, in which the effect is barely discernible, or is simply not worth the wait. And what of that book test? Here, you must talk away the book, or the audience will attribute the entire effect to the prop, like the illusionist's box, rather than to the performer. But when was the last time you saw the book talked away, rather than watching the performer march forward with blithe and foolish confidence in mere method alone? The lesson? Changing specialties, no matter what your experience, makes you a beginner again. Experienced performers find this difficult to believe and stride forth in mistaken confidence without doing their homework. Methods need a great deal of help. No method can create an illusion on its own. Magical effects are fragile things, and as has oft been mouthed, but too little understood, magic happens not in actuality, but in the spectator's mind. Once again, quoting Hiding the Elephant, when magicians are good at their jobs, it is because they anticipate the way the audience thinks. Great magicians don't leave the audience's thought patterns to chance. They depend on the audience's bringing something to the table, preconceptions or assumptions that can be naturally exploited. All these many steps require that the performer venture far beyond the hazardous confines of unadorned method, out into that complex and beautiful world of illusion. The method is not the trick. Jamy Ian Swiss, Antinomy, 2005. With Darwin Ortiz, we delve deeper into the process of selecting a method. Jackson Pollock once wrote, "Method is, it seems to me, a natural outgrowth of need." Here we look at specific pitfalls magicians fall into when evaluating methods. Chief among them, the misguided idea that making a method easier to perform is the same as simplifying the method. Picking the Best Method by Darwin Ortiz. A quick survey of Internet magic boards will show that a large percentage of posters are seeking the best version of a particular trick. Is the Balducci levitation better than zero gravity? Can somebody recommend the best card to wallet? Which torn and restored card is better? The Reformation, the Restoration, the Reparation, the Renovation, or the Regurgitation? We live at a time when there is a glut of methods, versions, and improvements for every magic plot. Consequently, it's more important than ever to ask not just which version is best, but how do we determine which version is best? Life is simply too short to audience test every possibility. Before offering my own answer, I want to consider some of the most commonly used criteria. Cleverness. A weak trick remains a weak trick, no matter how brilliant or devious the method. Ken Weber, Maximum Entertainment. I remember once performing an effect for a prominent amateur magician. I didn't expect the trick to fool him, and it didn't. When I finished, he said enthusiastically, "That's a really clever method." "And it's a really strong effect for laypeople," I responded. "But it's a really clever method," he said admiringly. "And it's a really strong effect," I said. "But it's a really clever method," he retorted. Admittedly, this is not Oscar Wilde, G.B. Shaw caliber repartee. But that's the point. The impasse in the conversation reflected the chasm between his perspective on magic and mine. For many magicians, methods develop a seductive quality. The method justifies the effect rather than the other way around. I've been to more than one magic lecture where the audience initially responded apathetically to a certain effect, but fell in love with it when they learned the ingenious method. Magicians love cleverness. That's why magic books are filled with diabolically clever effects that are worthless for entertaining lay audiences. Even something as appealing as cleverness is only a means, not an end in itself. The cleverest method is not always the best method. I recommend a utilitarian rather than aesthetic view of methodology. The only thing that matters about a method is how impossible an effect it produces, not how good it makes you feel inside. Creativity. Here is another seductive method pitfall. Creativity is rightly valued in magic, perhaps because it's so rare. Yet it too is only a means, not an end. What the cleverness crowd and the creativity crowd have in common is that they both admire method divorced from effect. Methods need to be judged by their results, not by aesthetic qualities such as cleverness or creativity. All that matters is what the audience perceives. Another field that values creativity is advertising. Yet, ad agencies never forget that their job is not to win Clio awards, but to sell dog food. Consequently, they have a saying in advertising: it's not creative unless it sells. In magic, we should take the attitude: it's not creative unless it produces a strong effect. If you aim to be the most effective magician you can be, I recommend that you avoid emotional attachments to methods. If a doctor falls in love with surgery, he may perform an operation when drugs or physical therapy might have worked better. The surgery might be fun for the doctor, but what about the patient? Difficulty. Emperor Joseph II. Exactly. Very well put. Too many notes. Mozart. I don't understand. There are just as many notes, Majesty, as are required, neither more nor less. Emperor Joseph II. My dear young man, don't take it too hard. Your work is ingenious. It's quality work. And there are simply too many notes, that's all. Cut a few, and it will be perfect. Amadeus. Various legendary names in magic have been quoted to the effect that the way to improve a trick is to eliminate sleights. This is as ridiculous as a chef saying that the way to improve a recipe is to eliminate ingredients. Of course, it would be equally ridiculous to claim that the way to improve a recipe is to add ingredients. The key to a good recipe is finding the right combination of ingredients. In the same way, the key to designing a strong effect is finding the right combination of sleights and/or gaffes and/or subtleties. In one case, that may be many sleights. In another, it may be few or none. In one case, it may be difficult sleights. In another, it may be easy sleights. Of course, if you can eliminate a sleight without impacting the effect in any way, you should certainly do it. In practice, this is almost never possible. In a magic effect, removing something almost always requires substituting something in its place. What you substitute may be more handling, or simply a less convincing effect. The notion that you can remove a sleight and everything else remains the same is a fantasy. The easier is better school often argues that easy methods allow the performer to concentrate on presentation. This claim is undercut by the fact that so many of its proponents are such lousy showmen. They'll stumble and fumble their way through a self-working trick so badly that you tremble to think what it might look like if they weren't concentrating on presentation. I suspect that's because the argument is often an excuse for laziness. A lazy magician is no more likely to work on his presentation than on his technical skills. Your ability to concentrate on presentation is a function of your mastery of the method, not the difficulty of the method. Of course, it takes more work to master a difficult routine. You shouldn't consider adding such a routine to your repertoire if you're not willing to do the work. Nevertheless, someone like Paul Gertner concentrates more on presentation while performing a technically demanding coin or cups and balls routine than most magicians do when performing self-working tricks. As misguided as it is to say that the easier version is always better, this is only the flip side of the equally misguided view that the harder version is always better. This attitude is found among many card technicians, particularly young magicians in love with their own technical skills. I think of these two camps as the old fart school and the young wise-ass school. I apologize to the many young and old who don't fit these stereotypes. Either way, judging the merits of a routine by how many sleights it contains is like judging the merits of a sculpture by how much it weighs. Darwin Ortiz, Designing Miracles, 2006. Tommy Wonder's The Three Pillars is, to my thinking, one of the greatest passages ever written on magic. Tommy manages to take us through the thought process of developing a method for a trick. He points out 3 pillars of method: psychological, mechanical, and manipulation. Use just one or two, and the trick risks being out of tune. A harmony of all 3 approaches will yield the strongest magic. The Three Pillars by Tommy Wonder with Stephen Minch. If I want to influence matter, Say I would like to alter a piece of wood. What would I use? Of course, I would not try to make such an alteration with my mind. In my mind, I could try to change the shape of the wood, but it is improbable that any change would occur. No, using another material object would be better, a knife maybe. Then I could carve the wood to the exact shape I desire. Now, what if I wish to change your thoughts? Would I use a knife? Yes, by using a knife, I might be able to appear to change your thoughts. Governments have attempted to change the thoughts of their citizens by using such things as knives, guns, tanks. But did it really change the thoughts of the people? Or did those people just pretend their thoughts had changed while the threat was present? How much easier it is to change someone's thoughts by giving them other thoughts. Matter and thoughts. To change each of them, you need the right tool. Use the wrong one, and you are likely to have little, if any, success. When we perform magic, what do we change? Is it something that people see, or hear, or smell? Or is it what people believe they see, hear, or smell? Are we not painting a picture of another reality, one that does not really exist, but only seems to exist? It is an impression. It is a supposition that people believe. It is a chimera. Magic only exists in their minds. It does not exist in reality. If it can only exist in their minds, then are we not changing people's thoughts? And if magic consists of changing thoughts, then the tool we need, as magicians, is obvious. Of course, we could proceed as do those obtuse governments who still haven't learned that one cannot change thoughts with matter. We could try to change our audience's thoughts with material things, like props and gimmicks. We could be that misguided. Our movements, too, are fundamentally material, although most of the time they tend to carry meaning and, therefore, are fed by thought and can change thoughts in others. However, gestures such as waving silk handkerchiefs in a presumably elegant fashion are actions that convey little thought. They are essentially material in nature. To be truly successful as magicians, though, we must understand that magic is an art of the mind. And to achieve a genuine feeling of magic, we must use our own minds to affect those of our audiences. There is no better or more efficient tool. Thoughts to change thoughts. Psychology, then, is our main and primary method. It is the key pillar on which magic rests. So let's change the thoughts of our audiences. Yes, let's change those thoughts by giving our spectators other thoughts. But how can I give an immaterial thing like a thought to my audience? After all, they probably can't read my thoughts, so I must find a way to communicate the thought I wish. Now, what media do we possess for that job? Well, of course, I could use speech, the trembling of my vocal cords, which vibrate the air, which vibrations, in turn, are picked up by the eardrum, that gossamer membrane. Basically, speech is a physical form of communication that relies on the use of matter, the vocal cords, the air, the eardrum. Or I could use paper and ink to give my thoughts to you. Again, matter is used to transport my thoughts into your brain. Or maybe I can convey my thoughts to you with body language. By the way I, a material thing, move. By my carriage. By the way I pose or shape it, so to speak, into a material sign, a sign that you can understand. Regardless whatever medium I use to give you my thought, it always involves some form of matter. Without the use of matter, conveying my thoughts to you isn't possible, apart from genuine mind reading. So matter is always necessary in some way to make the conveyance of thoughts possible. We need matter to achieve the principal method behind the illusion of magic, to make possible the psychology, to express the desired thoughts. However, no matter what form of matter we use, it is there only to make possible the real method of magic. Thoughts to change thoughts. That is the foremost consideration. Matter cannot be the method used to change thoughts. It can only communicate thoughts. It is only the vehicle for the thoughts that make the magic. Matter makes our one and only effective tool, the thought, concrete, something with which we can work. Matter makes our method, our tool, practicable. That's all. This concept is so childishly simple, so obvious. It is astonishing that some magicians harbor the delusion that they can make magic in people's minds, change their thoughts by the mere use of matter alone, through the unadorned use of props, gimmicks, movements, words, or sleight of hand. It is amazing that some seem to think one can do magic without the use of thoughts, without psychology, without the mind. It is as irrational as trying to change people's thoughts by pointing a knife at them, or by giving them a new car or money or some other desirable commodity. You may scare or you may please by such primitive means, but you have little hope of achieving a change in the thoughts of the people involved. However, I can hear you sputter and protest already. You might say, if someone gives me a bag of gold, it would certainly make me happy, and therefore my thoughts would be influenced by mere matter. Yes, a bag of gold indeed might make you happy, and it certainly might eliminate some of the problems you may have. But does it really alter your thoughts? Does it truly change your thinking, your beliefs, your set of values? A bag of gold in itself cannot change your thoughts. It can only do so if there is another thought behind it. The material methods. The material side of methods, then, is a vehicle for our thoughts, the conduit for the real method of magic, psychology. But just what do we have in the way of material methods? There are two things, basically: manipulation and mechanics. Manipulation encompasses all the moves and sleights, and the ways we handle the props. With deceptive manipulation, we can paint false pictures of reality, a false representation of the facts concerning all the movements we make. The mechanical side is also a false representation of facts. The double bottoms, special holders, gimmicks, fakes, etc. Both things, manipulation and the mechanical, are equally effective in aiding psychology. Both methods are valid. What do we use then? If we want to deceive our audiences, we have a choice in what tools we use. Nonetheless, whatever the method employed, since all is obviously in the service of psychology, we cannot hope to deceive without it. It is the key pillar on which all our deceptions rest. Deceiving by psychology alone is possible. The only material aid would likely be speech, the agitation of air. It is also feasible to deceive by psychology aided by manipulation. Or we could do it through psychology aided by mechanical means. Or we could enjoy the support of both manipulation and the mechanical. All four possibilities are valid and can work. What if we were to use psychology alone? It might happen that we would meet someone who has a capacity for analyzing things of a psychological nature. This person, being adept in thinking about psychological matters, might see through our deception. It is unlikely, but it can happen. However, if we combine psychology with mechanical methods, it becomes much harder to see through the deception, since our astute spectator must then not only see through our psychology, but must also possess an analytical capability for things mechanical. The chance for deception becomes greater, since many people are not equally gifted in both disciplines of thought. In addition, Once someone starts analyzing an observed event in a certain way, that person tends to persist in thinking along that line. To analyze both the psychological and mechanical, one must mentally backtrack and reanalyze in a different way. In a sense, the effect must be analyzed twice, once for each discipline. This seldom happens. If you would make a combination where the psychology is supported by both the mechanical and manipulation, then three different disciplines are in play. To see through three disciplines, the effect has to be analyzed 3 times, and the spectator has to be versed in all three. Such triple analysis is extremely rare. It is logical, therefore, that a secret based on all three disciplines has the greatest chance of survival. In such circumstances, our secret is well protected. Those magicians unskilled in manipulation frequently forget it and use what we often miscall self-working magic. Here, the sole support for the psychology is the mechanical. This charitably presumes that these magicians are even aware of the psychological aspect of their self-working trick. The only things they feel comfortable using are the mechanical methods. What a loss! They have thrown away such an important support. An invaluable cover for their secrets is totally ignored. And some are just the opposite. They scorn the use of mechanics, either out of some sort of false pride or because they have no knowledge of the mechanical principles of magic. Or they distrust them, thinking mechanical apparatus always breaks down at showtime. A nonsensical idea that we will return to shortly in this essay. These magicians, too, rashly discard one of the pillars on which magic rests. Although magic can be done effectively while ignoring one of the pillars, as long as it is not that of psychology, it is a pity to do so. It is throwing away something that can be used to great advantage. Being weak or unknowledgeable in one or more of the three pillars of magic is not uncommon. If you are not well versed in psychology, however, you can stop right now. Magic will not be possible. For, as we have just discussed, how can you hope to change your audience's thoughts without the use of other thoughts? So if one is not well versed in psychology, one must learn it or forget magic completely. Coin collecting is a pleasurable hobby too. If you are not well versed in manipulation, and if you still have a good grasp on psychology, you have a fair chance to create a good piece of magic. Nevertheless, learning the required sleights and movements would be far better. Your magic will be considerably improved by it. Otherwise, you have severely limited your possibilities, and magic does not fare well under limitations. The same concept applies to the mechanical side. If you don't know mechanical principles, they should be learned. Ignorance in this area, again, means limited methods at your disposal, and your magic will suffer for it. Why use mechanical magic? Having raised the topic of mechanics, some special comment on this branch of methodology is necessary, since it has fallen widely into disfavor. In some circumstances, mechanical means can be more efficient than manipulation, and it is important not to lose sight of that fact. Otherwise, you cannot adopt the best method for the effect you wish to create. Nevertheless, mechanical methods have become unpopular with many magicians. There are 3 reasons for this. Number 1. Because mechanical magic frequently seems self-working, it appeals to those magicians who don't wish to practice. They believe that the apparatus can do the work for them. Of course, this isn't so. Consequently, mechanical magic is often performed wretchedly. One can get the impression that something is wrong with mechanical magic, since it often appears that it can't be done with precision or artistry. This, however, is the responsibility of the performer, not of the mechanism employed. Number 2. Much mechanical magic looks suspicious. A box made to do a trick. It is obviously a piece of mechanical magic that works itself, and the audience thinks, if I could buy that box, I could do that trick as well. And number 3, many magicians don't trust mechanical magic. It works fine at home, but when you go to do a show, it breaks down. You can't depend on it. Most times, the problem that gives rise to this third criticism is that the apparatus has been badly or cheaply constructed. I have seen apparatus so poorly made, it is a miracle that it works even once. To build mechanical magic properly is usually expensive. If you use cheap materials or a cheaper but inferior design, the apparatus cannot be expected to work dependably or well. Take a car as an example. Even an inexpensive car relies on parts that must operate in a specific way hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of times. These parts do this because they have been properly designed and built, and are made of the right materials. Magic apparatus, to be good, must be built the same way. If you build your magic like a Rolls-Royce, or even a common Ford, there is no reason it should break down. Developing and building good dependable mechanisms can be costly, and if you must rely on someone else to design and make these for you, it can be even more so. It takes skill, knowledge, and time. Consequently, I have educated myself in mechanical principles. I've taken some classes in machine building. I've bought the necessary tools, taken the time to develop the skills required to fabricate the apparatus and gimmicks I need, and I build them myself in my own workshop, just as my predecessor, Fred Capps, did. I would recommend that magicians serious in the use of mechanical principles do the same. Good mechanical design generally uses as few moving parts as possible, because if something is to go wrong, it most often happens with those parts. Also, you must employ the best materials for your purposes. Once you have done this, it is also necessary to test the apparatus. Not 50 or 100 times, but several hundred, and with extra strain on the unit to assure that it will stand up to performance conditions. This testing is very important because it will reveal flaws in the design, and sometimes you will have to build it again to get it right. It can be a lot of work, but it is all part of the process of building good apparatus. If you do these things, and if you regularly give your apparatus the proper maintenance, you can place as much trust in it as you would in your well-rehearsed manipulative abilities. It is important, though, to understand that when you use mechanism as a principle, it should not be in open use. This brings us back to the second criticism mentioned above. Obviously strange boxes and apparatus boast to the audience of their mechanical contrivance. The mechanism should be hidden, secret, just as good psychology and sleight of hand are hidden and secret. Contrary to common belief, apparatus that appears normal does not automatically escape suspicion, if the apparatus obviously performs the effect or does something to aid it. Giving fast rules for determining when this will occur is hard, but the mechanical principle has failed when the audience sees something inexplicable happen with a prop and thinks, oh, it's just some mechanical thing that I don't completely understand. Just because the apparatus appears normal doesn't guarantee that its function and use won't cry out, I'm gimmicked. If one hides mechanical apparatus so that it isn't apparent, you can produce an effect that looks as magical as manipulation often looks. Indeed, mechanics can aid manipulation, making it more efficient, and sometimes, though not always, easier. There are times when mechanics can increase the difficulty of performance, yet nevertheless improve the magical appearance of the effect. However, the important thing to understand is that mechanics are not necessarily used to make your job easier. They are simply a tool to be applied to achieve your goal in the best way possible. Sometimes they do just that, At other times, another tool is better for the task. I hope that now it is clear that, while mechanical methods are grossly underestimated by many of today's magicians, the reasons for this unpopularity are based on misconceptions. I like mechanical apparatus and gimmicks, and as one of the three pillars of magic, I will not foolishly sacrifice such a powerful tool. Instead, I combine mechanics with psychology and manipulation to achieve the best illusion. A good example of this is the ring, the watch, and the wallet, which is to a great extent mechanical. Yet, psychology and manipulative handling are integral to the success of the effect. Consider just the vanish of the three objects from the envelope. The money is vanished through palming aided by mechanics, the mechanics eliminating the need for finger motion. The ring genuinely goes into the envelope, and the watch never goes in. So, each object is vanished in a different way, applying all three principles psychology, manipulation, and mechanics at different times to achieve an astonishing effect. This trick could not be done purely by mechanics, or purely by manipulation, or purely by psychology. It is these principles in combination, the three pillars of magic, that make the deception so successful. When all three are employed with care and intelligence, the method behind the magic becomes entirely invisible, leaving only the mystery to be enjoyed. Tommy Wonder, The Books of Wonder, 1996. Let's put theory into practice, as Pitt Hartling explains a specific way in which we can use accidental mistakes, a bit of confusion, and presentation as a methodological tool. Method and Style and the Performing Mode by Pitt Hartling. In addition to the many styles of presentation, there are also different styles of method. Over the last few decades, the technical repertoire of card magic evolved quite rapidly, where, only a century ago, performers had a more limited number of moves and strategies at their disposal. We can now choose from literally thousands of sleights and principles to reach our magical goals. With this liberty comes the burden of choice. In magic, one effect can often be reached by a multitude of methods. Theorists have long been looking for criteria that would allow clearly saying which methods are better than others. Even though there might actually be a few such criteria, sooner or later, somebody will come along, break all the carefully established rules, do everything wrong, and the result will be not only deceptive, but also beautiful, artistic, and highly individual. There are 2 points to this. First, what might be a highly deceptive method for one performer might not fool a 5-year-old when done by somebody else. And second, the more experienced we become, the more we know and the more methods we assimilate. The more personal our choices will be, and the more these choices will be part of whatever it is that constitutes our style. Given a certain minimum of artistic experience, there is no good or bad anymore. Right and wrong have been replaced by you and me. In practice, this can be seen constantly. How would you personally approach the effect of a shuffled deck being magically put into new deck order? Are you part of the deck switch faction? Or do you consider yourself a member of the false shuffle club? Or how about mind reading? Would you opt for a force followed by a clean divination? Or would you choose a higher degree of freedom of choice, followed by some fishing? Of course, these decisions may be influenced by many factors like performing situation, practicality, technical ability, etc. But ultimately, those choices will be the result of, and at the same time a constitutive element of, your own personal style. That said, I want to mention a certain methodological tool that might or might not fit your style. The concept is not mine. In fact, I think nobody can claim having invented it, and I am sure many of you are already using it to a certain degree without even realizing it. At least, this is what happened to me. Even though I had been using the strategy quite a bit, I was hardly aware of the fact, and certainly did not consider it a concept, until I came across an eye-opening article Raphael Benatar published in Magic Magazine in January 2001. As the psychological technique that Raphael described in his article is quite an important element of my performances, I felt some of the descriptions in this booklet could be more deeply understood if this was explicitly addressed. So, with Raphael Benatar's friendly permission, and under his excellent title, let me offer a few thoughts on the performing mode. In most silent performances of stage magic, almost every move the performer makes, every gesture and every gaze are seen as part of the performance. The act is just that, a carefully studied sequence of actions that runs like clockwork. That is part of its beauty. The unique quality of a typical close-up performance, on the other hand, is a much higher degree of interaction between the performer and the spectators. Before and after the performance of individual tricks, people ask questions, tell little stories, joke, laugh, and talk about what they have seen. During these moments, there is no performance. It's like an intermission between acts. After a while, the performer strikes the gong, everybody re-enters the theater, and the performance is resumed. Striking the gong is switching back to performing mode, and it is clearly marked by a change of attitude. The performer sits up straight, pulls back his sleeves, and gets ready for the next effect. The spectators focus on the performer again, clear their minds, stop talking, and lean in to watch whatever miracles are awaiting them next. All of this is well known, and I guess there are few close-up performers who have never set up some cards in preparation for the next effect while toying with the deck. What opens up a whole area of possibilities is the realization that we can create those intermissions almost at will, not only before and after, but also during the course of a trick. This allows us to do all sorts of method-related business quite openly, without it being perceived as part of the show. A good illustration of the principle is the following gag. You bet a friend that you have full control over his body. You claim you can make him move at your command, and that he will have no chance whatsoever to resist your powers. To prove your point, suggest you will make him turn over his hand against his will and without touching him. When he agrees, officially start the demonstration. Hold out your hands horizontally and carefully position one above the other a few inches apart with the palms facing each other. Take your time, as if everything had to be adjusted just right. Have him place his hand flat between yours. As soon as he does so, add, "No, the other way around." He turns over his hand and, ta-da! You have made your point. This gag is not as silly as it seems. Think about it. You tell your friend you are going to make him turn over his hand. He tries to work against you. Yet, 1 second later he voluntarily turns over his hand. Why does this work? It works because he did not take your instruction to turn over his hand as part of the test. For him, the demonstration had not yet started. This is remarkable. Even though you have officially announced the performance to begin just a second ago. Just with a slight change of attitude and slightly different inflection of your voice, you have made him perceive the crucial instruction as an irrelevant formality. There's one difference to this gag example and the application of this principle to magic. In the above gag, your friend will realize what happened as soon as you say, ta-da. In magic, instead of revealing that your spectators misjudged the importance of a certain moment, you confirm their mistaken intuition that the little spontaneous intermission really was just that, by officially switching back to performing mode and officially resuming the performance. In short, by changing the inflection of your voice, your posture, and your overall attitude, it is possible to put actions in parenthesis, to make certain moments during your performance seem unplanned and not part of the show. Your spectators will still see what you are doing, just like your friend heard you say, "No, the other way round." But done correctly, they will tend to dismiss those moments as unimportant asides and forget about them the moment you switch back and continue the show. Unlike in misdirection, you don't try to hide anything or make anybody look elsewhere. You are happy to have your spectators watch everything you do, assuring that it is perceived as nothing of importance and forgotten a second later. Using this idea of planting a few mini intermissions in your performance is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allows you to make some tricky actions pass more or less unperceived without leaving your spectators with the feeling of having been misdirected or having missed anything. On the other hand, it interrupts the flow of your show. The more often you apparently leave performing mode, the more spontaneous, unplanned, and loose your performance will appear. That might or might not suit you very well, depending on your style. I, for one, believe when Di Vernon talked about clarity of effect, he was right in saying, confusion is not magic. When talking about method, however, I tend to add, but it helps. Credit for the general concept of the performing mode is attributed to Raphael Benatar. See the Performing Mode Theory, Magic Magazine, January 2001, page 21. Pitt Hartling, Card Fictions, 2003. Let's end our discussion in this section with Milt Kort's comically brief take on method. But in the spaces between these few words, there is great wisdom to be found. Kort's Cardinal Rules of Magic by Milt Kort. Rule number 1. It's the little things that count. And rule number 2. Always take every advantage you can. Milt Kort, 1999. Milt Kort. I met Milt Kort, 1917 to 2003, when I was a boy. By that time he was older, and his sleight of hand faculty had left him. Yet he astounded me with his unassuming but powerful magic. He recounted many funny and insightful stories about his interaction with other luminaries in our field. And he had a dry, abbreviated wit, as evidenced by his terse essay.